You know, when you think of science today, it's pretty hard not to think of Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? He's this massive, recognizable voice who's basically brought the entire universe down to Earth for millions of us.
And for so many people, he's the guy, the trusted guide you turn to for the big, cosmic questions. I mean, his influence is just huge. But what if that voice isn't always as accurate as we think? See, alongside all that fame, there's been this consistent hum of criticism from journalists, historians, and yet even other scientists. And they're all asking one big question. Just how accurate is that voice? All right, so let's break it all down. First, we'll talk about his role as the people's astrophysicist. Then, we'll get into the alleged pattern of inaccuracies. From there, we'll look at the charge of narratives over nuance, some pretty serious ethics and allegations, and finally, wrap it all up with what's called the communicator's dilemma. So first up, let's give credit where credit is due. For a huge number of people, Neil deGrasse Tyson is science. He's the people's astrophysicist. I mean, through shows like Cosmos and Star Talk, he's gotten an entire generation excited about looking up at the night sky. And you know what? That's a really big deal.
Okay, but now we've got to get into the tough stuff. The first major point of criticism is this: a pattern of, well, getting things wrong.
And it's not just one or two little things. Critics have literally compiled lists. We're talking about stuff like mixing up basic statistical terms, saying average when he means median. But it also gets into personal stories, like one about his jury duty, where the details seem to shift and change every time he tells it. It makes you wonder, what's the real story?
Probably the most famous example of this is a quote he loves to use. It's a really powerful line. Our country is addicted to oil, and he's repeatedly said it came from President George W. Bush. There's just one problem. George W. Bush never said that, not once. Fact checkers have looked everywhere, and the attribution is just flat out wrong. And look, it's a great line for a story, but when you're a science communicator, getting the facts right, that's kind of the whole game, right?
And that brings us to the next and maybe more complicated layer of criticism. The argument here is that these aren't just random mistakes. The claim is that sometimes facts are bent on purpose to fit a specific narrative. And a lot of the time, that narrative is about an epic battle between science and religion.
This idea has a name, actually. Historians call it the warfare thesis, this notion that science and religion have always been at war. And a poster child for this story, especially in Tyson's telling, is a guy named Giordano Bruno.
So look at the difference here. The way Tyson presents it, especially in Cosmos, Bruno was a martyr for science. He was killed because he had these radical ideas about other worlds and an infinite universe. But the historical record tells a really different story. The consensus among historians is that he was executed for religious heresy, for things like denying the Trinity and the divinity of Jesus. His scientific ideas were, at best, a footnote in his trial. Here's another example. Tyson has promoted this narrative that a single scholar in the 11th century, Al-Ghazali, basically shut down the entire golden age of Islamic science. It's a dramatic story, right? The problem is, it's not true. Historians of science have completely debunked this. Major scientific and mathematical advancements continued in the Islamic world for centuries after Al-Ghazali.
Okay, this next one is a little more philosophical, but it's super important. Critics say Tyson often blurs the line between two very different things. On one hand, you have methodological naturalism. That's just a tool for doing science. It means when you're in the lab, you only look for natural causes for natural phenomena. Simple enough. But then there's philosophical naturalism. That's a worldview, a belief that says only the natural world exists. Nothing supernatural, no God, nothing. The critique is that Tyson presents the tool of science as if it proves the worldview, which is a huge philosophical leap.
All right, we need to shift gears now. The next set of criticisms are much more personal and sensitive, moving beyond his public communication to his ethical conduct.
Okay, so there's a range of issues here. There was a partnership with a snack company, NatureBox, that faced criticism for what some called misleading health claims. Then there's his rhetoric. While he identifies as agnostic, many critics argue his tone can be really mocking towards religious belief, creating a kind of scientific dogmatism. But by far the most serious issue, multiple women have publicly accused him of sexual misconduct. These allegations were serious enough to trigger investigations by both Fox and National Geographic. It's important to note, the results of those investigations were never made public.
So, wow, that's a lot. What does this all mean when you put it together?
Let's take a step back and look at the big picture here, because it really gets at something bigger than just one person. It's what you might call the communicator's dilemma.
Think about it. If you're a science communicator, your job is tough. You have to take these incredibly complex ideas and make them simple enough for everyone to understand. You have to wrap them in a story that's engaging and memorable. But, and this is the big but, how do you do all that without sacrificing accuracy? How do you avoid oversimplifying to the point where it's not even true anymore? It's a really, really tricky balancing act.
And really, that's the core issue that all these criticisms point to. This isn't just about Neil deGrasse Tyson. It's about a much bigger question for our time. What happens when the need to entertain starts to overshadow the need to be rigorously accurate? When does science communication stop being education and start being just entertainment?
So in the end, it leaves us with a really important question. And it's not just for science communicators, it's for all of us. In this age where we are just flooded with information, where do we draw the line between a helpful simplification and a harmful distortion? And how do we get better at spotting the difference? That's the real takeaway here.